the Enneagram is not just a descriptor. It's not just a way of describing coping mechanisms and autopilot patterns. It is a mode and a tool for growth, deep transformation.
What's up? What's up? What's up? Welcome to the AlignUs podcast, a transformative journey into the worlds of wellness and philanthropy. I'm your host, Dr. Nikhil Sharma, and I'm so grateful to have you guys here with us today. All right, let's begin part 2 of the introduction to the Enneagram with Joanne and Melinda.
Yeah, and I can do 3 as well. Threes are, I like to call them the performers, because that's just how they do life, right? They want to be seen as successful, valuable. They want to be seen as sometimes even the best at what they do where they are. So, however, they do that in a way that's similar to 2, they shapeshift. And so often they'll take on the values and the what's valuable to the group around them, and shapeshift into that, and often become the most successful version of that in order to be admired. And so as opposed to 2s wanting to be loved, 3s want to be respected, admired, applauded, instead of, loved is fine, but I think those other things are more paramount for 3s. And they'll shapeshift in order to do it. But they don't know themselves, right? They lose touch with their own internals as well.
I would say that if you overlay all the personality disorder descriptions in therapists, all the diagnosis codes, you will see 1 or 2 or 3 personality disorders for every type except for type 3.
Yeah.
I see. That's interesting.
We're in a very 3-ish country.
Yeah.
And so 3 is just assumed to be the standard.
Yeah. It's like all about success and, getting to the top,
looking
good, like having other people think you're, awesome.
Is that right? So have we found out that type 3 is the most common the most common Enneagram type in the US?
No, I don't think so. But I think it's probably the most aspired to.
Gotcha.
I wouldn't say that there's more 3s in the population, but because their dynamics are just assumed to be the baseline, 3s, in addition to their deadly sin being self-deceit, have the hardest time recognizing themselves because all of the entire world basically applauds them for their ego patterns.
Yeah, and they are so productive. They do things all the time. Even their rest is productive.
Yeah.
Often I run into 3s in my own practice because they've burned out. They're like, I had a heart attack. My body's given out. Like, I'm sick,
my marriage is falling apart.
My marriage is falling apart. My relationship, and I had no other choice but to come to therapy. And so because they put themselves out,
and they come in just tell me what the steps are. I'm like, let's go,
let's do this. You're gonna have to get into your feelings, and they're like, that's so unproductive,
inefficient.
That's so inefficient.
And that's interesting, right? Because they're a part of the heart type, right? And I feel like that type is, a little bit vulnerable, or they have a lot of emotions. They're emotional thinkers.
I think what's interesting, and we'll talk about this more with the heart triad, but 2s, 3s have like they underdo feeling, they underdo heart, and 4s overdo it. Sorry. And 2s tend to be in conflict or have a chaotic.
And in the gut type as well, that's the same case. 8s overdo anger, 9s underdo anger, and we're at odds with it. So 9s in the gut triad are the ones that are like, how are you in the anger triad?
Right. They're like, they're never angry. So,
and that would be 6s for the head types.
Right. So for 3s, exactly correct. They don't really have much in touch with their
emotions. Got it. All right. Now moving on to type 4, and we have our experts here in Joanne.
The resident.
I'm just in the
class. One way of easily conceptualizing 4s is in opposition to 2s and 3s. In that 2s and 3s tend to seek connection at the expense of authenticity or
Yes.
connection with themselves. Fours go the opposite direction. They overly connect with themselves and lose connection with other people. So sometimes the fours are known as like the romantics, the artists, the tragic, whatever. That can happen, but it kind of depends on the four and the context that they're in. Because whereas like nines try to find the common area and try to blend themselves in, fours try to stand out. So I think the term individualist is probably more useful and flexible in that they often live as if everyone else belongs with each other, but I stand out. I'm on the outside looking in. There's something different about me, for better and for worse.
Yeah.
Either I'm super special and awesome, or I'm like the worst person on the planet, or both.
Sometimes they oscillate. Yeah.
But it's still the sense of feeling disconnected from life, from other people. And in their echo chamber, they focus on their flaws. It's like there must be something essential in me that I'm missing, and it's out there somewhere. What is it? I don't know, but it's probably something, and it's probably out there somewhere. So I got to go chase that. Instead of recognizing that we already have the essential thing in being present. And so fours end up being super emotionally expressive or emotionally motivated. They might not always show their feelings, but they tend to do according to how they feel. And what they feel often tends to be negative emotions because they're living out of the sense of lack and out of the sense of not being enough. And so very comfortable with like the negative feelings. Probably any movie or any like TV drama has like a lot of fourishness.
Absolutely.
Because, whatever doesn't involve drama is boring. And so fours tend to live out their drama. They probably don't need TV shows.
I mean, probably not.
Yeah.
Some of them might look down on fours.
Yeah. So fours often have an easier time when things are actually going terribly. Like during COVID, fours were like the calmest people.
It was I was like freaking out, and she's like, "Oh, well, things were already bad."
Yeah, everyone's having an existential crisis, and everyone's freaking out, and fours are like, "Oh, you guys are like now catching up."
This is where I drink and live.
I gotcha. So kind of like the rocks of the situation, like chaos. It's like, you guys are the people to be able to depend upon to help guide you through those tough situations that others may find very disruptive.
Yeah, actually, so I would say we're suffering junkies. It's like suffering, sadness is very delicious.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. And yet when you mention anything like hope or joy, they're like,
no, pass.
But you did mention a good thing about mentioning about the lack and how people live. I feel like a lot of people live in that mentality where, we are not good enough. And, we tend to dwell on the negative aspects of our being. It's almost like our brains are hardwired to try to figure out the one or two things that aren't going good in our life or that we feel that we don't have. And that's just a feeling. And again, our feelings are not, and our thoughts are not always true, but somehow we believe that they are true because, again, from a young age, that's what we've been growing up to believe. And so it's, I think it's something that a lot of us can resonate with. And we feel like we need to gain validation externally for a lot of our feelings. But we realize, once we sit down and do a little self-reflection that, hey, all that we need is right here, right inside of us. We don't need to be like others.
And you mentioned earlier that we probably resonate with a little bit of everything because these are universal human experiences. Exactly. It's just that each type identifies with one aspect of the human experience and makes it same as if that's all of who they are.
Absolutely.
So fours identify themselves with their suffering. It's like their security blanket. And we have to recognize that there's a lot more to us than just what we think we are.
Absolutely.
Whereas for everyone else who's not a four needs to get in touch with fourish experiences.
Right.
Often that happens in midlife crises.
Absolutely. And I have a direct line to four. So it's been very helpful for me to get in touch with those things for sure.
For more resources on the Enneagram and to have access to our AlignUs blog, to have more insight on today's podcast, please visit us at www.alignusworld.com and make sure you follow us on our social media platforms on TikTok, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at the handle @AlignUsWorld. And make sure to energetically donate to our YouTube channel by hitting the like and subscribe button. That'd be greatly appreciated. And remember that as a large collective of positive energy, we can help awaken each other to live our best life. Now back to the podcast. And now we're moving into my favorite triad, just because I'm a part of this triad, which is the head triad. And that's types 5, 6, and 7. And this is the thinking triad.
Yes. So we'll start with 5. I'm married to a 5.
Okay.
Yeah. So actually 2-5 couples are really common. So 5s are known to be the observers. I live in Silicon Valley. A lot of mathematicians, software engineers, etc., scientists end up being 5s, interestingly, because it's a profession that has a lot to do with their brains. They rely on their thoughts and their heads in order to navigate life and remain in control. However, they have a very difficult time accessing their hearts and their bodies in order to input information, right? So my hook with 5s is often, you're not being as logical as you think you are because you deny 2 incredibly important ways of taking in information via your emotions and your body or your gut. 5s are very top heavy, and so head heavy. And so they really, out of fear of being overwhelmed, out of fear of being overtaken, they rely on their heads to kind of get them through life, thinking, knowing things, and keeping a lock control on their energy. So God forbid a 5 doesn't know what they're going to do with their day, because they're not going to be able to allocate their energy correctly so that they're not depleted, which is, I think, probably one of their biggest fears. Anything you want to add?
I like describing 5s as someone who's living in a fortress with an ivory tower.
Yeah.
It's like heavily guarded walls with like a drawbridge. And on top of that, they're living in their ivory towers looking down and observing everything else, all the meanwhile feeling sad and lonely very deeply.
They isolate a lot.
Like wanting to be connecting with others, but feeling very scared of possibly being overtaken if they were to let them in. But if others also move away, they're like peeking out the windows, like, where's they going?
Yeah, I gotcha.
I think that's the aspect that a lot of people don't really know about 5s. Like, they're deeply sensitive. They have really deep feelings. It's just they have a really hard time connecting with others and like connecting with those emotions, right? So they might, if somebody identifies as 5 and heard me say that, they'd be like, "Do I?" But they do.
Very deep.
Very deep.
Somewhere in there.
Do they have like it seems almost, do they have a quality of being judgmental at times? Because they built up this like tower and they're seeing things from, this higher perspective, or so they think.
I think it's because they find their knowledge as a source of safety and security. It's like if they're more certain, then they're less vulnerable.
Right.
But inadvertently, they end up looking down on other people.
Yes.
And so that can often create a lot of tension in their life circumstances. At work, they get praised for it because that's what they're paid to do in being the expert. But in personal, non-professional arenas, it's really, really hard.
Absolutely.
The other part around the fortress is that because the gates are locked up, they only have a set number of materials, resources, etc. And if only they opened the doors to be connect with the rest of the world,
they'd have more resources.
But because of their fear of possibly being overtaken and seeing others as possible invaders, they keep their doors locked up, and then they need to figure out, how am I going to ration myself, my time, my energy, my money,
all the things, which is the passion of the 5, which is avarice. So they need to make sure, they need to make sure they have enough, because they're not accepting other resources internally, right? So
we need to get that drawbridge down for them, to their fortress, and
they need to get that down for them. But they've also learned how to live on
very little,
and so they think they have enough with what they have because they've shrunk in their
rationed
hearts,
so much.
and they decrease the size of their needs.
Yep. Yep.
So scarcity is there.
It's a huge thing.
They don't know scarcity.
No.
All right. Well, look, that's a great explanation of type 5s. And now we're moving to type 6s.
You have family members.
I have family members.
As we're going through this conversation, there's so many people who are popping into my head for like each type. It's just so beautiful. And I'm hoping that's happening to those that are listening and viewing this podcast as well, because you can see and it starts with your family and your close friends, and you're like, yes, that's so-and-so. But yes.
Yeah. So type 6, also a head type. So type 6s are interesting, right? Because they're the contrarian. I think that's what they have lots of terms, but contrarian is good. And they live in the world anticipating the worst. So in order to, if 5s, 6s, and 7s are on the fear triad, the head triad and the fear triad, 6s are the ones that overdo fear. So they are constantly anticipating worst case scenarios, how they are going to get through them, what is going to happen, how they're going to survive in order to get through the day and through their lives, right? And so they have an over focus on those things, and their needs are around security. How can I be safe in this world that is so dangerous? And so 6s kind of go about that in different ways, either finding somebody who is an authority to kind of latch on to, but also they're suspicious of them, finding community and friends to find security in, and or conquering their fears, going straight at them. So, but either way, they tend to be controlled by fear. And often find themselves paralyzed to know what to do in the midst of it. Even though they're creating worst case scenarios, they often always question themselves. Am I doing the right thing? I don't know. Like, should we be doing this? I don't know. And so they often have a very hard time kind of landing on a way to be or go, because they have a very hard time trusting themselves and others. Okay. So
let's say the descriptions of type 6s from the outside would mimic a lot of PTSD symptoms.
Yeah, for sure.
Just the main difference is that, like, in terms of like hypervigilance, like worst case scenario, like scanning for signs of danger, mistrusting other people, all that stuff.
Yeah.
It's just that 6s do it as part of their defense mechanism.
Yeah.
So 6s too also can experience trauma, but a lot of their internal turmoil comes from them assuming that there's a threat and danger. Yes. And so pre-traumatic stress disorder probably describes them instead of post-traumatic stress disorder. Whereas 5s tend to find their security in accumulating knowledge.
In their heads, yeah.
6s find their security in anticipating, being vigilant, and planning for things. Not knowing that they probably don't need to prepare as much, but 6s, it's as if they need to have something that's dangerous to justify them preparing for it. So 6s have a really hard time owning their actual power and their own strength. So these are folks who often can be stuck in imposter syndrome, a lot of self-questioning and self-doubt, even though everyone else is like, well, what are you talking about? Like, you're so good at this. It's like, no, but what if?
Yeah. They give away their power a lot, and project it outward, which is another defense mechanism of the 6. But they project their power outward, like, oh, you know what you're doing, I'm going to trust you. But they're not the contrarian for nothing. There's also a conflictual.
It's a love-hate relationship with authority figures, because 6s have disowned their own power.
Exactly. So,
and for those who don't know, with the imposter syndrome it's really when you tend to self-doubt your own abilities and beliefs. When you're feeling you're not good enough or you don't belong here, that's typically known as imposter syndromes. But yeah, I think that's a very good oral explanation of 6s. And yeah, so moving forward to the last but not least, clearly the best, And I'm pretty sure I'm clearly probably already exhibiting some of my characteristic traits for a type 7, which is like an enthusiast or a dreamer type. But yes, how do type 7s typically show up?
Well, I'll say this one thing, and then I'll let Joanne take the helm. I've 7s are one of the only types I know who, when they find their type, they're like ecstatic. They're like, "This is the best. Clearly, this is the best type."
So fun,
so fun, so exciting. Like, cool. Wait until we get to that depth work.
Oh, I know. You're right.
7s. I like describing 7s in comparison to 1s and 4s, who are the other idealist types. It's like a 3-legged stool. I mentioned with 1s that they tend to compare at reality to the ideal and fill it, the space in between, with frustration. 4s deal with sadness. 7s fill it with excitement and anticipation. And so 7s, it's kind of counterintuitive. Like, how are they in the head type? How are they? Well, it's head type's easier to understand. How are they in the fear triad? It's like, because they're so like positivity, like fun, excitement, etc. It's just that what we see on the outside is the fear showing up.
Yeah.
It's like the fear of being trapped, especially being trapped in pain and suffering, all the negative stuff in the world, by overly considering the world as being their oyster, and they're going to go out and have all these fun experiences so that they don't have FOMO.
That's it. It's the fear of FOMO for sure.
Absolutely. It's like, I'm doing this fun thing now, but what are the 5 other fun things that I could also be doing right now?
Keyword is could be.
Right. It's all about what could be.
Exactly. And I'll tell the viewers audience, like, how it shows up for me, or how it used to show up for me, was that I would have a large group of friends. I have many friends and different group circles. And so I would go out with one group of friends. And while I'm there having dinner, I'm not really paying attention to what's kind of going on there. I'm actually thinking about the club that we're going to be going to next, where I'm going to meet my next group of friends, which are the more outgoing, like really want to get crazy. We're going to take shots, but I'm here at dinner because these are my like resident friends, and I, still have a good community with them. But, I can't wait for the next scene. Let's hurry up and finish up. I'm looking at the clock. I'm like, let's go. We're missing out. The party's about to start.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I think some ways that shows up in the day-to-day is not wanting to lock down plans just in case something more exciting shows up.
Yeah.
And so often 7s can be very slippery in the way that they kind of get away from like making decisions or making commitments, all the meanwhile rationalizing. This is where the head type kicks in.
Yep.
Really effectively rationalizing why that is good or why that's important. So 7s would be like the kids who talk the parents out of making sure that they do the chores because they've justified some good reason, but it's really the defense mechanism at work so that they don't have to do the boring stuff.
Yeah. And something else I really want to emphasize with 7s is that that deep fear of being trapped or stuck in negative emotion is the thing. Negative emotion is the thing that drives them, right? Like there's huge fear of really being in the present, and being in the present means accepting whatever comes, positive, negative, it doesn't matter, right? 7s avoid the negative. And in fact, that if I find so sad, they don't actually experience true joy, because true joy is being fully in the present and accepting everything that is like all negative and positive experiences, and then finding joy. And so 7s actually miss out.
That's
right. The other is that 7s accidentally end up creating suffering for themselves by avoiding it. So 7s are one of the 2-3 types that tend to only show up to therapy when they're dragged into couple therapy because their partner is so fed up. We need to talk.
We're good. Everything's fine.
Yeah. So
I can confirm that. Yes. I've been in that situation.
Who are in the splash zone are the ones who overly experience negativity because the person who's a 7 is underly doing so.
Right. Yeah, I feel like we don't like routines, and we don't like to be tied down for, too long, and we love our freedom. And anytime that there's pain, we like cringe and run. And I'd usually book a flight to Vegas as soon as I felt like I needed to escape any kind of, tough situation, whether that was something that was going on with my family and my dad or whatever have you may be. It's just the feeling of sitting in anything discomfort. I don't want to feel like that's all that there can be. There always is a positive side, or there's the grass is greener on the other side type of situation, and that's why when I read about the sevens, I was like, oh, that's me. There's no way, like, it just was, I fell right perfectly into that. And now when you're explaining it like this, and then, obviously I've been doing the work for the past 9 months, but you see like where the qualities that you think that are good, but there is clearly a really bad side to being the way that you are, at least for a seven. That's that not having any routine, that, nowadays Joanne knows that I can't live without a routine, like I have to be up at 6 o'clock in the morning. I have to walk, I have to meditate, I have to journal, and so, and that's what's great about the Enneagram, right? It's about finding out who you are, what has worked for you and what hasn't worked for you to get to where you're at today, and then implement a plan of how you can move forward
and follow it to its
yes.
end. Go all the way.
Yeah.
Not just start a new project.
No, exactly. And just for people to really understand, this isn't easy. This is not an easy journey. It's not something that's going to happen overnight for you. I'm on this journey for 9.5 months, and I feel like I'm just past the surface of what the potential is. But if you keep at it, despite numerous obstacles that will certainly come up, because you changing is going to trigger a lot of people. It's going to make you have to possibly change jobs. It's going to make you have to change your friends. It's going to bring a lot of change, and change is very uncomfortable for people. It's uncomfortable. We're creatures of comfort. It's easy for us to fall back to our autopilot mode and to be back with the same friends that we grew up with. And it's not to say that we can't be around these people. You just have to be cognizant about this journey. It's such a beautiful journey. You literally will empower yourself. You will take life by its horns and be able to control and actually dictate most of the actions and outcomes that will happen in life. Whereas before, I feel like you're just going by through life, and then something happens and you're like shocked, and your body gets, you're not able to handle life's adversities when you're not as awake as you can be.
Well said.
Yes, there we are. I don't think I can really top that.
Nope.
Well, look, that's a perfect way, I feel, to kind of wrap up this beautiful interview today. And are there any key takeaways that you guys have for us about the Enneagram? And specifically, we'd love for our audience and viewers to be able to join on this journey and try to figure out what their Enneagram types are. And so we try to have them do something this week and some sort of challenge.
So I think a key takeaway, which kind of leads into the challenge and the challenges over the series, is the Enneagram is not just a descriptor. It's not just a way of describing coping mechanisms and autopilot patterns. It is a mode and a tool for growth, deep transformation. And so with that in mind, that's how I want us to kind of take these challenges that we have for the week, because this is about finding our essential selves.
Yeah. You really can't change what you don't know is already happening.
Exactly.
So the very first step is find out what's happening.
Aware.
Mm-hmm. So if you don't know your type, that will be the first place to start. And you kind of get a sense of it when you're listening to the 9 types. You're like, ooh, that didn't feel good. Or oh, that sounds so familiar. It might be because either that is your type, or you have a connection to that type in your growth path. Or it might be that some of the significant people in your life kind of embodies that type as well. So just first point of explanation is, as you listen to the different type descriptions, like notice your internal reactions if it really isn't likely your type, you're not going to have much of a reaction to it.
Mm-mm.
Because your behind the scenes defense mechanism isn't going to be put on blast.
No. Yeah. And if you're like, oh, that type sounds cool, that's probably not your type, unless
I would love to be that type. That's not your type.
Yeah.
It's described well, then it's not your type.
After you find out what your type is, then it's for you to allow whatever reactions to come up. It's very normal. It's kind of like the Matrix. You take the pill and you find out that life in reality is like totally different from what you thought it was. And so it's okay for you to feel disoriented and confused.
You probably will.
Highly recommend you either work with a professional who can help walk you down that path, or some really good trusted friends who are also committed to doing their own personal work.
Absolutely.
If you don't know your type, we do have a blog that has like DIY step-by-step instructions. Though, because the Enneagram is a description about why we do what we do instead of what we do, it can be a lot more slippery than like Strengths Finders or Myers-Briggs that you can just take an online test for.
Exactly. So then I have there's another resource that we have that will describe like probably a really good indicator that you found your correct type. So I would suggest reading both of those resources.
Yeah.
And we'll certainly link and provide the descriptions of those websites in our comment section below. And just one quick question. So you're saying that the personality type tests that are online for the Enneagram are not accurate or reliable sources? Because you know how it is these days. People like pass along these little links and then it's like, oh yeah, take the Enneagram test. How accurate are those tests, just for everyone to understand that, you know?
I would say, I mean, if it helps eliminate like some numbers of the 9, fine.
That's fine. But they're not, I would say they're not particularly accurate in finding your core type, because a lot of those tests are they're going on the like what the type can look like, not necessarily the motivator. So like people get mistyped very easily if they just rely on a test.
And it's also like the social context that we're in also matters too, because like countries have their own Enneagram type style. Or like specific families or specific like organizations. And so sometimes like, there are some shape-shifting types who tend to look like whatever they are expected. And so like we also can't just rely on test results because of those other layers involved. It's also self-reporting. And honestly, if we're not really self-aware already, like how accurately can we really answer questions about like what our core needs or core fears are? I don't know. It's like hiding in the back.
All right. Thank you for tuning in to the AlignUs podcast, where we inspire a world of wellness and philanthropy. For more resources and to stay connected to AlignUs and the AlignUs app release, please visit our website at www.alignusworld.com. And make sure to follow our social media pages on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, Twitter, and YouTube with the handle @AlignUsWorld. And make sure to check out Melinda's Instagram @Investigator Counseling, as well as our website, www.inviteracounseling.com, as well as Joanne Kim's Instagram @OliveMeCounseling, and our website, www.olivemecounseling.com, for more great services that will help you on your personal growth journey. Until we meet again, make sure to stay aligned, stay connected, and stay anchored into the power of unconditional love. Namaste.